A report that came out today, well, or this week, I should say, it's one that isn't surprising a lot of people that are really aware of the cannabis market in this country. But Stats Canada would tell you that black market cannabis is $3 cheaper per gram than cannabis that you buy from the government-approved locations, be it the government themselves or whoever else. Jodie Emery essentially called this long before marijuana became legalized. She's, of course, one of the leading cannabis advocates in this country. She joins us on the phone lines right now. Jodie, nice to talk to you this morning. Thanks for the time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
For people who don't know, why is it still cheaper to buy cannabis from the dealer you've been buying from for years as opposed to the quote-unquote legitimate shops in this country right now?
Well, the government of Canada created a system by the rich, for the rich, to ensure that only a select few people would be making any money from cannabis or cannabis law enforcement. Right now, we have all of these businesses that the government has approved, but they're operating under prohibitive regulations. The packaging, the taxes, the barriers, the costs, the permits, everything required is unnecessary, expensive, and prohibitive. So only those with a lot of money can afford to play, but they're not even making any money on the product. It's just stock market speculation based on the federal government's restrict and limit access approach. So one funny thing about this is it guarantees that prohibition is still in place. The entire market that was illegal before is still illegal now. The police and law enforcement get their hundreds of millions of dollars more to go after marijuana. And the few retailers who do get approved turn into turncoats and start calling for law enforcement to crack down on the competition. This is just a new prohibition. It's not really legalization of anything except the ability of cops and governments and big business and their cronies to make money at the exclusion of everybody else.
Now, here in Ontario, we've got this lottery coming up to have the brick and mortar stores, or we've had this this lottery, and what's going to happen with that is there going to be a certain number of stores, but it's going to be very tightly regulated, and to get the store open, you need to have a $50,000 credit to essentially say the province, you can have this if things go poorly. That's not helpful either as far as increasing access in the market.
Oh, of course not. And this is all just insane considering that legalization was presented many, many years ago as a reason to address all of the existing cannabis in supply. We don't have a real cannabis supply shortage in Canada. There's so much pot despite prohibition. That's why we were going to legalize it, to recognize that trying to eliminate it through tough laws and penalties didn't work and won't ever work. But now you have the governments across this country restricting and limiting access, banning stores, banning cannabis, punishing people for it. And it's just mind-boggling because years ago, legalization was meant to acknowledge that there's a lot of pot users, and a lot of pot entrepreneurs. I mean, my own experience proves that if Canada needs marijuana and stores, I can help you open up dozens of shops across this country that never run out of cannabis within the next week. I could do that. But the government will not allow that. They only want to allow a select few chosen people to make a little bit of money and use that as an excuse to crack down on everybody else. It's kind of a cartel model where the government makes all the money and they use force and coercion and threats of harm to eliminate peaceful, nonviolent operators from being allowed to participate. It's a new prohibition.
So if that's the case, then is the situation, or is what we have here, the rules that we've got right now, are they so far gone from being reasonable or usable in your mind that we have to essentially scrap the whole thing and start over?
Oh, goodness, I would love that. That would be the best option of all. Throw out the Cannabis Act, throw out the provincial regulations, and get rid of every municipal ban. Remember, when Justin Trudeau won in office, he said he was going to allow dispensaries to operate, but then the former top narc, Bill Blair, who oversaw G20's violations of throwing innocent people in cages, he was put in charge of marijuana, and now he's the marijuana minister of all things. So once you put a top cop in charge of legalization, you know who's going to benefit. And as I've often shared, 45 former government officials and police and drug law officers are now making money on marijuana. In fact, Toronto City Councillor, former councillor, he just joined another pot company. So this is about legalizing it for a select few advantaged people to get even more advantage, and to make sure that people like myself and entrepreneurs and traditionally excluded people can't possibly have a chance. Even if I win the lottery in Ontario, like you said, you need a $50,000 letter, and that's to give to the government when the government refuses to give you supply. So it's absolute madness. Restrict and limit access all across the board. Meanwhile, medical patients don't have access. Canadian consumers don't have access. And the legal cannabis that is available is mass-produced, factory farm cannabis being sprayed with tons of pesticides approved by Health Canada. There's a class action lawsuit on behalf of veterans who were poisoned by Organigram's fake organic cannabis that was sprayed with pesticides. So when the government talks about protecting people's health, and this is about safety, we really need to look at what they're doing. They're not protecting people. The government profits from deadly drugs and alcohol and harmful substances every single day, and they refuse people the ability to access the safer choice, the alternative to booze, cocaine, hard drugs, opioids. People want cannabis. That's why dispensaries opened up so much. So it's insane that governments are trying to make legalization actually accomplish what prohibition could not do, which is eliminate cannabis.
Well, that being the case, it's still going to be available, and people are still going to have a chance to access it. And look, I'll be honest. I'll say it on the air. I've been amongst those who has used the online purchasing aspect of this. I didn't necessarily like that option of purchasing, but it was really the only one that I had. So it's still available, just not as plentiful or as readily available as we would like. Do you think that there's a chance that the attitude sort of shifts here and it becomes a more reasonable system just on its own, just as users navigate it and as consumers navigate it?
Well, we're certainly still pushing and lobbying and doing all the activism necessary, because there are limits to the legal supply. Even if you can order from the online store, you're buying dried out, impotent, really old, crusty cannabis at extremely high prices. So why would the government not allow the existing industry to transition? Why would they not allow the massive amount of cannabis supply that exists to get into the legal system? It's because they want to maintain prohibition, so law enforcement and governments still have the big bad cannabis industry to go after. Meanwhile, they tell everybody, hey, buy from us instead. You know it's all about money when that's what they're doing. It's not about providing access. Access could be provided, but every step along the way, the government is trying to limit and restrict and prohibit. And then even worse, they want to punish the pioneers and the prohibition victims. I'm not saying that I deserve the first license because I've been an activist for a very long time, but I certainly would like at least an equal opportunity to, say, police chiefs who called marijuana legalization akin to legalizing murder. You know, maybe people would probably want to get their cannabis from activists and advocates, not people who made money putting Canadians in jail for cannabis.
Well, it's a frustrating situation just because a lot of this very much was predictable. Getting back to what we said with Stats Canada before we go, Jodie, once there is a little more supply, and like you said, you don't think the quality is good, but once there's a little more supply, do you see the two dollar amounts for the black market and non-black market cannabis evening out a little bit and getting a little bit closer, or do you think it's going to stay this way for some time?
It'll stay this way because over-regulation is a form of prohibition, and the costs of wholesale cannabis make it almost impossible to be a successful retailer. When wholesale prices are $9 a gram, you have to sell it at $18 a gram. If I can go get it for $7 instead, that's where I'm going to go. So it's really the government's fault that they're increasing these prices. And remember, a lot of these big businesses made a hell of a lot of money on the stock market, and they are desperate to try and keep making money by being the only ones allowed to provide access. But it's completely unnecessary, completely predictable, but it's just a new prohibition so that the people who tried to stop cannabis before are now going to be the ones selling it and making sure that everybody else is arrested. So this is fake legalization.
We will have to leave it there, Jodie. Thanks a lot for the time today. Thanks for the chat.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. That's Jodie Emery, who's one of the leading cannabis activists in Canada.
You've been listening to the Craig Needles Podcast. Catch the show live on 980 CFPL weekdays from 9 till noon.